Dear American friends of the Mauritshuis, welcome in the Mauritshuis. This is a great opportunity to share this newly installed room with you through this video. I am Lea van der Vinden. I'm a curator at the Mauritshuis. I'm an art historian specializing in 17th century painting. And today I'm here together with Carolina Montero, my friend and also former colleague at the Mauritshuis. Together we collaborated on the exhibition Shifting Image in Search of Johan Maurits in 2019, which was a critical and multifocal exploration of Johan Maurits, the history of Johan Maurits. Currently, you are working at Leiden University, and could you tell us a bit more about your current research?
Sure. Hi. As Lea said, I am Carolina Montero. I am a cultural historian, and now I am doing my PhD at Leiden University in the social and cultural history of slavery in Dutch Brazil. I also did my second master's at Leiden in museums and collections, and it's where I studied the representation and some of the paintings of Dutch Brazil and how they have been displayed in museums throughout the years.
Okay, great. It's also because of your new research into Dutch Brazil and also the research project that's currently being undertaken at the Mauritshuis that it's a great opportunity to discuss some of the paintings in this room today together. And I wanted to start with this painting, a portrait, obviously, of Johan Maurits, Count of Nassau-Siegen. It was painted by the Dutch artist Jan de Baan, and it's still in its original 17th century frame, which is in fact quite unique. What's interesting to note is that this is a 17th century painting made for Johan Maurits, but it came to the Mauritshuis in the 19th century. It was an acquisition of the Dutch king, William I, especially for the Mauritshuis in 1822, the year when the Mauritshuis opened as a museum. And therefore this acquisition shows that Johan Maurits has played a very important role in the museum right from the start. Now this portrait shows Johan Maurits in his later years, when he was in his 60s, also showing him as the governor of the city Cleves in Germany. However, of course, Carolina, I think you would agree with me, the earlier years of his life when he was governor of Dutch Brazil is much better known, right?
For sure. It's very interesting if we understand that he was in Brazil for only 7 years. But especially in Brazil up to today, he's still known as the Brazilian. His image as the Brazilian man still lingers in our memory as Brazilians. And I think that has a lot to do also with the fact that he took with him a lot of scientists and artists to Brazil that have made all this painting, some of them that we're going to see today. But it's also interesting to notice that in the past few decades, for example, scholars have been going more in depth into this image of this so-called enlightened man. And new research has come to life on his life and also on his administration there. Some of which, for example, on his connections with slavery and especially the smuggling of enslaved Africans to Dutch Brazil, some of which I conducted with a friend of mine, Dr. Eric Odehart. But it's interesting for us to have an idea also of how much of the mythification of these characters, colonial personas, are still embedded in our society and can contribute somehow to social inequality, to racism, and topics that we've been calling out in the past few years.
Yes, exactly. Also, at the Mauritshuis for a long time, up until a few years ago, really, we shared a very much one-sided, exclusively art historical perspective on Johan Maurits, showing him also exclusively as a benefactor of art, architecture, and science. And to me as a researcher, but also as a curator, it's so important to share with our visitors a fuller, but also more honest view of history.
I completely agree with you.
Yeah. So now let's have a look at some of the other paintings in this room.
Let's go.
This canvas was painted in Brazil by a Dutch artist, Frans Post. And he was he was part of a small group of artists, painters, and also scientists who traveled together with a large group of soldiers with Johann Maurits to Dutch Brazil in 1636. This is the first painting we know by Frans Post, and it's probably also the first oil painting that was ever made of this part of the world, of Brazil. And that's also the dominant narrative we used to share with this painting. However, there's much more to be told. And Carolina, for you, when you look at this painting, what's the first thing that comes to your mind?
To me, as a researcher of Dutch Brazil, and especially as someone who studies slavery in Dutch Brazil, it's striking of how much this painting has already been investigated throughout the years. And we have, for example, studies on the landscape itself and how much of the sky takes part of most of the painting. We have studies about Itamaracá, the island. We have studies on even the eroded part of the island that some believe it was because of the monoculture of sugar. We have studies on the fort that you can only see very small on the right side of the painting. And we had for a few years, for example, a debate on the two white men in the painting, whether they were Dutch or Portuguese. In the end, I think we had a consensus that they were Portuguese because of the clothes they're wearing.
That's those two in here.
However, up to today, we have no investigation whatsoever on the Africans on the painting. We can see two men on the painting, and we have no research. We usually have no mentioning of them in books or either at the museums they are displayed, either in temporary or permanent exhibition. And to me, that says a lot, not only about what we say of Dutch Brazil, but also what we say about colonialism.
I completely agree. Now also with keeping this in mind, let's have a look at the other painting by Frans Post. So this is also a painting by Frans Post, but it wasn't painted in Brazil, but in the Dutch Republic. In 1644, Frans Post returned together with Johann Maurits to the Netherlands. And afterwards he continued painting Brazilian views, Brazilian compositions throughout the rest of his life. And these are very detailed, very colorful, and also highly idolized compositions. And this is extremely beautiful example. A landscape, it's colorful, there are different groups of people. And here at the Mauritshuis, for this painting, we used the title Brazilian landscape with a house under construction. And Carolina, I talk about this title because I know you very well, and I know that you are quite critical about this specific title. Could you explain why?
Yes, that's true. I'm very critical of not only this title, but the way Frans Post as a landscape painter is emphasized. And also because out of the more than 100 paintings that have survived of him, most have in the title either landscape or view. So there is this emphasis on the place in Brazil we are talking about. However, I do believe that when we are talking about colonial representations, this could be also a way of diverging the real elements, the art in the painting that go beyond the scenery. In this particular composition, I think, which is a great example of this. So here, for example, you can see a group of Africans or Afro-Brazilians right in the middle of the composition. And some of them are playing drums, some others are dancing, some of them look like they are selling things, goods in the street. Whereas there's a group of indigenous, probably Tupi people, coming towards them, carrying some bows, arrows, weapons, but in a peaceful way. Whereas you can see right in the middle of the painting, two European men just walking away of the group as if everything was in calm and harmony. It's a strange sense of peacefulness that we know it was very unlikely for a slave society, for a colonial daily life in Brazil.
Yeah, I agree. And it's also so important to acknowledge that these kind of paintings originated or were painted through a European and also highly idolized lens. And I think it's so important to know more of the history and the background of Dutch Brazil to really understand what's going on such a painting, on what's depicted, but also why it's idolized and what's left out of sight.
For sure, I completely agree with you. And the fact, for example, that Post painted this in the Netherlands for a specific clientele also tells a lot. He was not a naive painter of Dutch Brazil. He knew exactly what he had to put on his compositions to make them sell. And before in Brazil, to make his master, so to say, Johan Mauritshuis, who had commissioned his works, happy. So it was a very conscious choice of elements when he puts all these different people in a canvas in a sense of strange harmony.
Yeah, it's a European view on Brazil made for specific European markets. And that's what you see when you look at such a beautiful painting. Now, I would like to switch to other paintings in this room that show how colonial history also is to be seen and to be found in subjects that are situated in the Netherlands instead of Brazil. This is a posthumous portrait of Mary Stuart. She was married to the Dutch stadtholder William II, and they resided in The Hague. The portrait is painted by the Dutch court painter Adriaan Hanneman, also from The Hague. However, Mary isn't alone in this picture. There's also a servant, and he is pictured while putting on a string of pearls on Mary. However, when you look at her, it seems as she doesn't notice him at all. And this is something you also see that happens in literature. When you flip through publications that feature illustrations of this painting, the servant, most of the times, isn't mentioned at all, as if he isn't in the picture. Also, for a long time, art historians thought that black persons, black servants in these kind of pictures were fantasy figures. But through new research, we know that there were several black servants living and working at the Dutch court in the 17th century, and some of them have even been identified. Unfortunately, we don't know the name of this young man, but I really hope that future research will give him his name back.
Yeah, me too. And although we know that slavery was not allowed in the Dutch Republic, we can find documents from the 17th century that state that people from Dutch Brazil, Europeans and Dutch people, came back with servants, with enslaved persons as well. We don't know the status these people took once they arrived, But probably they went from slavery to servitude, which still is a dependency bond that these people kept while in Europe. But for sure, more research needs to be done within these people's life stories.
Yes, and thankfully that's also happening at the moment. Also, when I look at this painting, there's of course this stunning attire of Mauritshuis. And could you also tell something more about that?
For sure. I think this painting is so spectacular in all these aspects, also with the boy, but with the fact that a noble woman from the 17th century would very unlikely be wearing this kind of attire on a picture. Strangely enough, we know from a letter that Mary Stuart in 1655, she attended a ball here in The Hague, dressed as an Amazon. Some our historians thought that she was dressed as a Greek Amazon. But I think this painting shows very well that she could be well dressed as an indigenous Amazon. Of one of the warriors, for example, that were encountered near the river Amazon, which bestowed the name of the river in Brazil, somewhere in the 16th century. But what is striking on her attire is the cape. She's likely wearing a Tupinambá cape, which was worn by Tupinambá warriors in Brazil in different rituals. They were usually considered to give them, these people, a kind of external power when worn. And they are made of the feathers of the guara bird, which are very common to Brazil. Very soon, these capes became widely known and desired by the European public, and the indigenous people started to commercialize them very well. So lots of them ended up in Europe. We do believe, for example, that this could be an example from Johann Mauritshuis' collection that was lended to Mary for this specific ball. And what is more interesting about this is that up to now, only 11 of these capes survived, and they are all in European museums. In Brazil, we are unfortunately unable to see any of them.
Yeah, that's true, right? Okay, now to conclude, I would like to go together with Carolina to the last painting in this room. This is a portrait of an unidentified girl standing next to a children's high chair. And we don't know her name, but she must come from a wealthy family, judging from her dress, but also the golden jewelry and everything. The portrait was painted by Govert Flink. He works in Amsterdam and he was a former pupil of Rembrandt. And you can also see the influence of Rembrandt's painting technique in this painting, especially with his fluently painted chair to the right. However, the reason I really wanted to have this painting in this specific room lies in a tiny detail. When you look at the painting closely, over here on the table of the chair there are a few white objects. And those objects are tiny bits of candy made out of refined sugar. Now the painting is also dated 1640. And at that time, of course, Johann Maurits was still governor of Dutch Brazil. And therefore it's also highly likely that this sugar originated from Dutch Brazil. And this detail links the world of this young girl with a world far away, a world she probably didn't even know of. A world where children of the same age and their parents were forced to work on sugarcane plantations, in sugar mills, under inhumane and life-threatening conditions. And I think that's so important that when we look at these paintings of the 17th century, that there are many links to be found that link these works 17th century painting to colonial history, but sometimes you actively have to look at them and find those details. To conclude, what would you like to add to this story?
Yeah, I find it very emblematic that we're able to have a painting on this space that has bits of sugar in it, because in the end we have real produce. We have a product that was the center of the whole colonial system in Dutch Brazil. And we have the production around which millions of lives of people were enslaved, and their descent as well. But more importantly, I would say that it is emblematic because even after the fall of Dutch Brazil, sugar was still the basis of the continuation of this colonial system. The Dutch left Dutch Brazil, but they didn't retire. They didn't come back and stop their colonial process in the Americas. On the contrary, they went to places like Curaçao, like Suriname, and continued and developed and exploited the system even further for hundreds of years, and continued to ship, I would say, hundreds of thousands of enslaved people throughout the Atlantic.
Yes, that's true. Thank you so much, Carolina, and let's continue this conversation on the live Q&A. And we are very much looking forward to hear your thoughts and questions. Thank you so much.
For sure. Thank you, Leah, for inviting me, and thank you all for attending. I'll see you soon on the live session.